He promised to visit every week. Years later, he still does. He parked his car in the same spot he always did, second row from the gate, right under the old oak tree that never quite lost all its leaves, even in winter. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. Harold stepped out slowly, careful with his footing. His knees weren't what they used to be. The gravel under his shoes crunched like it always did. He reached into the back seat, pulled out a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and a small paperback book. Same routine, same time, every Friday. The cemetery was quiet. It usually was. A few birds in the distance, the occasional breeze through the trees, but mostly silence. That's what Harold liked about it. No rush, no noise, no one asking questions. He walked past the rows of headstones, nodding slightly at names he'd come to recognize. Not because he'd known the people, but because he'd seen them enough to remember. Each one had its own little space. Flowers, flags, trinkets left behind. Harold never touched anything. He just passed by, respectfully, until he reached the one he always came for. Her name was Ellen. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't have to. It was there on the stone, clear as the day it was carved. He set the chair down, opened the thermos, poured a little coffee into the lid like he always did, then sat. He didn't start with anything deep. He never did. Just simple updates. The weather, the traffic, the grocery store being out of milk again, the kind of things they used to talk about over breakfast. She'd always listen, even when the details didn't matter. He still talked to her like she was listening. Some weeks he brought a book and read a few pages aloud. Other weeks, he just sat. Let the silence fill in the blanks. There was no pattern, no schedule, just presence. That's what mattered. At first, people thought it was just a phase, a way of coping. A few weeks, maybe a couple of months. Then he'd move on, like people do. But weeks turned to months, months to years. And Harold never missed a Friday. The staff at the cemetery noticed. The woman at the front office started greeting him by name. The groundskeepers gave him a little nod whenever they passed. Nobody asked too many questions. They just let him be. Sometimes visitors would spot him and wonder. They'd glance over, maybe whisper to whoever they were with. Who is he visiting? Why is he here every week? Some even tried to ask. Harold never gave much away. He'd just smile, polite but distant, and say, "Someone I loved." And that was that. He never made a show of it. Never brought balloons or elaborate flowers. Just coffee. A chair. A quiet presence. It wasn't about grief. Not anymore. Not exactly. It was about keeping something alive. Not her, maybe, but the connection. The promise. Because years ago, in a room filled with machines and quiet nurses and the heavy air of goodbye, Ellen had asked him for one thing. "Come see me," she'd said. Her voice had been soft. "Even if it's just for a few minutes. Just come." And he had said yes. Not because he felt obligated, not because it made the loss easier, but because she had asked. And Harold had always kept his word. So every Friday he showed up. Same time, same routine. A man in a folding chair, talking to someone no one else could see, telling her about the little things, pouring coffee for one, not looking for attention, not waiting for answers, just keeping a promise. The hospital room had that quiet stillness that only shows up when people know what's coming. Harold sat beside her bed, one hand wrapped gently around hers. The machines beeped steadily, doing their job without complaint. The sun was low through the window, late afternoon, soft light on white sheets. Ellen was tired. He could see it in the way her eyes opened just a little at a time. She wasn't in pain, not exactly, just worn out, like the weight of everything was finally catching up. He didn't talk much, didn't know what to say. After all the appointments, the treatments, the late nights, there weren't many words left. Just presence, just being there. She opened her eyes again and looked at him. "You okay?" she asked, her voice thin. He nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You?" She didn't answer right away, just gave the smallest smile and let her eyes close for a moment. "I've been thinking," she said, opening them again, "about after." Harold's jaw tightened a little, but he didn't stop her. She had a right to talk about it. He just didn't like hearing it said out loud. "I want you to keep living," she said. "Don't just stop. You've got years ahead." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She smiled again. "That's not what I meant." He looked down at their hands. Her skin was pale and cool. He gave her fingers a light squeeze. "I'll be okay," he said. "Don't worry about me." She let that sit in the air. Then, softer than before, she said, "Will you come see me?" He looked up. "After I'm gone. Just sometimes. Sit with me. Talk to me." Harold swallowed. He hadn't expected that. "You don't have to make it a big thing," she said. "Just show up. Like you do now." He nodded. "I can do that. Even if it's just for a little while." "Every week," he said, almost without thinking. "I'll come every week." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "You will?" "I promise." There wasn't a dramatic moment. No tears or dramatic music. Just a quiet agreement between two people who had shared a lifetime. A promise made without fanfare. Just simple words that meant something. They sat like that for a while, not speaking, just holding on. Outside, the wind moved the branches against the glass. A nurse walked by, then another. Harold didn't notice. His world had narrowed to that room, that hand in his, and the weight of what he'd just said. Later that evening, after she had fallen asleep, Harold stayed in the chair. The television was on but muted. The book he'd brought sat unopened in his lap. He watched her chest rise and fall, each breath a little slower, a little shallower. He thought about all the years they'd had, the morning coffee, the quiet dinners, the holidays with too much food and not enough chairs, the arguments, the making up, the long drives, the even longer silences when words didn't matter. And he thought about the weeks ahead, the first Friday, the one after that, then the one after that. He didn't know how it would feel, didn't know if he'd keep it together, but he knew he'd go. That wasn't in question. He had made a promise, and Harold was a man who kept his word. The first few times, nobody said anything. Harold would pull into the cemetery, same time every Friday, set up his chair, pour his coffee, and sit. Quiet. Steady. People came and went, but they didn't speak to him. They noticed, though. It was hard not to. He was older, moved slower, always wore the same brown coat, even when the weather didn't call for it. He kept to himself, never made a scene. But the routine, week after week, made people curious. The woman in the blue sedan started it. She came on Thursdays, visiting her sister's grave 2 rows over. One Friday, she showed up a day late and saw him sitting there, watched from a distance, didn't interrupt. But later she asked the office staff, "Who's the man who visits every Friday?" They didn't have much to tell her, just that his name was Harold, that he'd been coming for a while, that he always brought his own chair. No, he never asked for help. No, he never caused any trouble. Just visits, sits, and leaves. Word spread slowly. People started to watch. Not out of rudeness, just curiosity. He wasn't doing anything strange. But he never missed a Friday. Not for snow, not for rain, not for holidays. That kind of consistency sticks with people. One afternoon, a younger man walking by stopped near Harold's chair. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you mind if I ask who you're visiting?" Harold looked up. He wasn't annoyed, just thoughtful. He took a sip of coffee before answering. "Someone I loved," he said simply. The man nodded, unsure how to respond. "That's nice," he said after a pause. "I mean, it's good of you to come." Harold just nodded. The man waited a moment longer, like he might say more, but then turned and walked on. After that, it happened more often. Strangers would stop, ask a question or two, and Harold would answer in that same quiet, steady way. "I made a promise," he'd say. Or, "It's just something I do." He never gave more than that, not because he was hiding anything. It just didn't feel like the kind of story you handed out to everyone who asked. A teenage girl once asked if he was her husband. "The one you visit," she clarified quickly. Harold shook his head. "No, she was my wife." "She must have been special," the girl said. She was. That was all. And still he came. Every Friday. The cemetery staff learned to leave him be. Sometimes they'd wave from a distance. One of them, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard, started placing fresh water in the outdoor vase stand on Fridays, just in case he ever needed it. He never used it, but he noticed. Once in a while, someone would leave flowers near his spot, not directly on the grave, just nearby. Quiet gestures, no names attached. Harold didn't mind the attention, but he didn't look for it either. His focus stayed on the grave in front of him, on the words carved into the stone, on the memories. People kept wondering, why every week? Why this man? Why this grave? But Harold never offered more than he wanted to. Some things didn't need to be explained. Winter came early that year, the kind of cold that seeps into your joints and stays there. The trees were bare. The sky sat low and gray for days at a time, but the car still pulled into the same spot every Friday. Same time, same place. Harold stepped out, careful on the ice. The gravel had frozen into something harder, less forgiving. He moved a little slower, but he didn't stop. He reached into the back seat and pulled out the folding chair, the thermos, the book he wasn't sure he'd read. The cemetery was almost empty. Most people stayed away when the weather turned, but not Harold. He walked the same path, past the same markers, nodded once at the statue by the old fountain, then made his way to her. Ellen. The name on the stone was all he needed. He unfolded the chair, sat down, poured a little coffee. The steam rose fast in the cold air. He didn't say much that day. The cold had a way of pressing everything down, even the words. But he was there. He had promised. As the weeks passed, the weather didn't let up. There was snow, ice, wind that stung the face. Still, Harold came. One Friday he showed up in boots and a heavy scarf, carrying a shovel, cleared the spot himself, sat down like he always did. Some of the cemetery workers watched from the small brick office near the gate. One of them shook his head and said, "Every single week." Another said, "I don't know how he does it." But they didn't stop him, didn't offer to take over. They understood it wasn't about comfort. It was about keeping a promise. Spring came slow, the kind of slow you almost don't notice until one day there's green again. The air smelled different, softer. Harold noticed. He walked the path with a little more ease, still careful, still steady, but without the weight of winter in every step. He started reading again. A few pages each visit. Out loud. Just enough to feel like she was there, like she was listening. One day in May, he brought flowers. He didn't always bring them, but this time, he did. Not roses, not something showy, just a handful of wildflowers he picked up on the way. He placed them gently on the stone, said nothing. The summer came with heat, the kind that sticks to your skin. Still, Harold came. He brought a small battery fan one week, placed it on the ground next to the chair. It didn't do much, but it helped. He talked a little more in the summer. Told her about a neighbor who'd gotten a new dog. About the tomatoes that weren't doing so well this year. About the air conditioner that needed fixing. The kinds of things they used to talk about. When fall rolled in, he didn't miss a step. The air turned cool again. Leaves covered the ground. He wore a jacket again. The routine never changed. Every Friday, without fail, the seasons came and went. People did too. But Harold remained. Rain, snow, heat, wind. No matter the weather, he showed up. Set the chair down, poured the coffee, sat in silence, or spoke softly. And always, before leaving, he would place a hand on the top of the stone. Just for a second. Then he'd pack up, walk back to the car, drive home. It wasn't about being strong. It wasn't about holding on to the past. It was about showing up. Because he had promised. And that meant something. The new groundskeeper started in late September. His name was Marcus. Early 40s, clean cut, worked quiet. Didn't talk much unless you talked first. He'd taken over after the last guy retired. Most people didn't notice the change, but Harold did. The first few Fridays, Marcus kept his distance. He'd watch from behind a row of hedges or while trimming near the back fence. Not in a rude way, just curious. He'd never seen someone so consistent. Same man, same time, every week. One morning, after a cold front moved in, Marcus walked past Harold's spot and noticed something different. The man's hands were shaking slightly. Not from emotion, just the cold. Harold was bundled up in his usual coat, scarf wrapped twice around his neck, but the wind cut through all of it. Marcus paused at a respectful distance. Thought for a second, then kept walking. The next week, Harold arrived like always. But this time, when he unfolded his chair and sat down, he noticed something sitting next to the stone. A new travel mug, stainless steel, still warm. No note, no name, just there. Harold looked around. He saw Marcus near the tool shed, pretending to sort through a box. Their eyes met briefly. Marcus gave the smallest nod. Harold nodded back. Nothing else was said. After that, Marcus started clearing Harold's path when it snowed. He'd shovel early, before anyone else arrived. He'd trim back the branches that dipped too low near Ellen's spot. Pull a few weeds. Small things. Quiet help. Harold noticed, but he never made a big deal out of it. One Friday in November, as the leaves blew across the gravel, Marcus finally walked over and stopped a few feet from Harold's chair. "You mind if I ask who she was?" he said gently. Harold looked up, thought for a moment, then nodded toward the headstone. "My wife," he said. "Her name was Ellen." Marcus glanced at the stone, took a breath. "She must have meant a lot." "She still does." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Harold motioned toward the second chair he'd brought that day, just in case. "You're welcome to sit," he said. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Sat down slow. They didn't talk much, just sat there, facing the stone, the wind moving through the trees. After a while, Marcus asked, "How long's it been?" Harold didn't have to think. 7 years. Marcus looked surprised. "And every Friday?" "Every Friday." He nodded slowly, like he was trying to wrap his head around it. "Why?" he finally asked. Harold didn't answer right away. He poured them both some coffee, passed a cup to Marcus, held his own with both hands. "Because I said I would," he said. "Because she asked." Marcus didn't say anything, just sipped his coffee and looked out over the rows of stones. It wasn't a dramatic conversation. No emotional breakthrough. Just two men sitting in the cold, one holding a promise, the other starting to understand it. After that day, Marcus never missed a Friday either. He didn't always sit. Most times he just stayed nearby, sweeping, clearing, fixing. But he kept an eye out, made sure the chair was steady, that the path was clear, that the coffee never ran out if the thermos was forgotten. He didn't need to be told what it meant. He could see it. In the way Harold showed up, in the way he looked at the stone, in the way he stayed until the cup was empty, the words were spoken, and the silence had settled. Harold had made a promise, and now, without ever being asked, someone else was helping him keep it. Marcus didn't ask many questions after that. He didn't need to. The way Harold spoke told him everything. It wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, just clear, simple, like a man who had spent years thinking about what mattered and had cut the rest away. One Friday in late January, Harold arrived a little later than usual. The weather had been rough that week. Windy, cold enough that the doors on the car froze shut that morning. Marcus was already near Ellen's grave, brushing off a few scattered branches that had blown in from the trees. "You okay?" he asked as Harold made his way up the path. Harold gave a short nod. "Just slow today." Marcus didn't press. He helped unfold the chair, handed Harold the coffee he'd warmed up that morning, then gave him space. Harold sat down, looked out at the rows of headstones, and then back at Ellen's. "You know," he said after a long silence, "people think it's about grief, but it's not." Marcus looked up. Harold kept his eyes forward. "It's not about being sad all the time, or not being able to move on." He paused, then said it again, slower. "It's about love." He rubbed his hands together, let the warmth of the coffee seep through his fingers. "I come here because she asked me to, but I keep coming because I want to, because she was the kind of person you don't forget, the kind that stays with you in every little thing." He looked down at the stone. "She's in the way I make the coffee, the way I fold my laundry, the way I still double-check if I lock the front door, even though I know I did. She's everywhere." Marcus didn't interrupt. "And when I sit here," Harold continued, "it's not about saying goodbye again. It's about remembering who we were, what we had, the good and the bad, all of it." He leaned back in the chair. "We didn't have a perfect life, but we had a real one. We argued. We struggled. We laughed. We got through things. And at the end of it all, when the hard part came, she looked at me and asked one thing. Just keep showing up." Harold let out a breath. "And I'm still showing up." Marcus nodded. "I get that," he said. "I do." Harold looked over at him. "You got someone?" Marcus hesitated. "Yeah, I do. She's still here, but I think about it sometimes. What I'd hold on to, what I'd still do, even after." Harold gave a small smile. Then you understand more than most. Another silence settled in, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet where things sink in, where words hang a little longer than usual. Harold finished his coffee, placed the empty lid back on the thermos, stood up slow. He looked at the stone for a long moment, then reached out, hand resting on the top edge like he always did. "I'll see you next week," he said. Marcus stayed by the path, watching as Harold made his way back to the car. And in that moment, he realized something. This wasn't just an old man keeping a promise. This was love, steady and quiet, choosing to show up, not out of obligation, not because he had to, but because that's what real love looks like. A folding chair, a warm cup of coffee, and a man who still says, "I'm here." It was late spring when the boy finally joined him. Harold was already sitting in his usual spot, a light breeze moving through the cemetery. The grass had come back in green and full, the trees overhead filled out again. He had just poured his coffee when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned slightly and saw him. A young man, early 20s, tall, same eyes as Harold. There was hesitation in the way he walked, like he wasn't sure if he belonged there. Harold didn't say anything at first. He waited, let the boy find his pace. The young man stopped a few feet away. "Hi, Grandpa." Harold nodded once. "Hey, Jack." Jack looked at the headstone, then back at Harold. "Mind if I sit?" Harold gestured to the second chair beside him. It hadn't always been there, but lately he brought it just in case. Some part of him hoped. Jack sat down slowly, looked at the grave, then at his hands. He didn't speak for a while. "I've been meaning to come," he finally said. "Just never knew what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Harold said. "Just being here's enough." Jack nodded, swallowed, looked around the cemetery. "She used to tell me stories," he said quietly, "about how you met, about how you'd drive out to the lake every Sunday. I remember that one the most." Harold smiled a little. "Yeah, we did that for years, rain or shine. She loved that place." "I didn't really understand it back then," Jack said. "I was just a kid. But now, I think I get it." He looked down at the grass, picked at a small leaf. "Mom said you've been coming here every week, even in winter, even when you weren't feeling great." "I made a promise," Harold said. "And she's still part of this family, just not in the way we can see." Jack didn't speak right away. Then he said, "I used to think grief was something you got over, that one day it just stopped hurting. But it's not like that, is it?" Harold shook his head. "No, it changes, but it doesn't go away. You just learn to live with it, and some days you even forget it's there. Other days, it shows up out of nowhere." Jack looked at the headstone again. "I wish I'd asked her more questions. I wish I knew her better." Harold didn't say anything to that, just sat with him. A few minutes passed. Birds moved in the trees. The wind shifted. Jack broke the silence again. "I'm glad you still come. It's quiet here, but it doesn't feel empty." "That's because it's not," Harold said. They sat for a while longer. No need to rush, no pressure to fill the air with talk, just the sound of the breeze, the distant hum of a mower, and two men, one remembering, one learning. Before they left, Jack stood and looked down at the grave. "Thanks for letting me come," he said. Harold placed a hand on his shoulder. "Anytime." Jack started walking back toward the car. Harold lingered a moment, touched the top of the headstone like he always did, then followed. That day changed something. After that, Jack came more often. Not every week, but enough. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he just sat. And slowly, without realizing it, he began to understand what the promise really meant. The walk from the car got harder. Harold didn't say much about it, but Marcus could see the difference. It was in the way he leaned a little more on the door as he stepped out, in the pauses between steps, in the time it took him to unfold the chair and lower himself down. He still came every Friday, but the effort showed. Word had quietly spread through the cemetery staff and a few in the community. Nobody made a fuss, but people started stepping in. One of the groundskeepers would check the path each Thursday. If snow was coming, someone would salt early. If rain had passed, they'd dry off the seat before he arrived. Jack started driving him most weeks. He didn't say it was because of the walk, just offered. "Thought you might want company," he'd say. Harold never objected, just nodded, slow and grateful. Jack didn't talk much on those drives, just played old songs on the radio. Harold didn't mind. Sometimes he'd hum along. Sometimes he'd close his eyes and listen. The visits stayed the same. Coffee, quiet, a few words to Ellen, a hand on the stone before leaving. But the weight of time was becoming clear. One Friday in late summer, Harold stayed seated longer than usual. Jack stood nearby, waiting, not rushing him. Marcus came by and nodded like always. Harold looked up at both of them. "Don't know how many more of these I've got in me," he said. Not sad, just honest. Neither Jack nor Marcus responded right away. Then Harold added, "But I'll keep coming, long as I can." Marcus looked down at the grass, then back at Harold. "You don't have to explain anything. We get it." Jack nodded. "You've shown up more than anyone ever could have asked," he said. Harold gave a small smile. "It's not about doing enough. It's about not stopping." After a moment, Jack knelt by the stone, brushed away a few leaves that had gathered at the base. "I think she'd be proud," he said quietly. Harold's eyes lingered on the grave. "I hope so." In the weeks that followed, Harold's steps slowed further. Some Fridays he used a cane. Others, he didn't get out of the car right away. Just sat for a bit. Looked out at the spot from the front seat. Even then, the routine didn't break. They always made it to the grave, even if it took a little longer, even if someone had to hold his arm. People around the cemetery noticed, but nobody made it a spectacle. No sympathy stares, no whispered comments, just a quiet respect for a man who kept showing up. It wasn't about strength anymore. It wasn't even about tradition. It was about connection, about a life that still mattered, about a man who didn't let time or pain or change stop him from doing what he said he would do. One Friday, when Jack pulled up to the usual spot, Harold stayed in the car a little longer, looked out the window. Then he said, "Can you read to her today?" Jack nodded, got out, took the book, poured the coffee, and sat in Harold's chair. He read a chapter, then another. Harold watched from the car, eyes steady, the edge of a smile on his face. It was the first time in years he hadn't walked up himself. But somehow, the promise still felt kept. The next Friday, Harold didn't show up. Jack pulled into the cemetery alone. Same time. Same space under the tree. But the seat beside him was empty. He sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, not moving. The silence felt heavier than usual. It wasn't just quiet. It was absence. Marcus had already heard. Word had come earlier that week. Peaceful, they said. In his sleep. No pain. The funeral had been simple, just like Harold would have wanted. A few close friends. Some old neighbors. Jack had spoken. told the story of the first promise, of the visits, of the folding chair, the coffee, the years of just showing up. They buried him next to Ellen. No fanfare, no music, just two names side by side, and the silence that followed. That Friday, Jack got out of the car and carried both chairs, set them up next to each other. One for him, one that would stay empty. He poured 2 cups of coffee from the same thermos Harold had always used, placed one on the ground near the stone, held the other in his hands. He didn't talk much, just sat. The wind moved through the trees. A few birds passed overhead. The cemetery was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. He stayed longer than usual that day, read a few pages from Harold's old book, looked out at the rows of headstones, then back at the 2 names in front of him. The groundskeepers passed by, gave him a small nod. One left a folded blanket on the back of the second chair without saying a word. Jack didn't need to explain. They all understood now. It wasn't just a routine. It wasn't just an old man holding on to something. It was a promise. And now it was his. The next week, Jack came again. Same time, same place. 2 cups, 2 chairs, 1 voice reading aloud. No need for reminders. No need for anyone to ask why. Because when someone teaches you how to love with your time, with your presence, with your word, you don't forget. You keep showing up, and you carry the promise forward. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.